Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. Or should I say Letheri Empire? Because we're in Midnight Tides. We're going to start with Midnight Tides today. I started reading yesterday. I'm like 2.5 chapters in, so this is going to be the first, look at Midnight Tides. And yeah, I'm basically sort of done with that stupid leg warmer thing. So I guess I'll better start knitting shirts at this point, don't I? Because yeah, pants, but also a shirt apparently, which I kind of forgot existed. But let's get into that later. So yeah, Midnight Tides, first book, first ramble. Cheers. All right, so let's start this. And others who have written, spoken, rambled, raged about Midnight Tides have already focused on something. And that is that Midnight Tides takes us to another continent with a whole set of new characters. I'm not gonna go and make it do a Daniel Green here and rage about it because A, I've read this thing before, so I knew what was coming, and B, I feel that if you read it, it's not that this comes completely out of the blue. There's a lot of this is built up. There's foreshadowing going on in a bunch of books before. I kind of hinted at it when those things showed up during the other books, and so I don't think it's that big of a surprise. And as I mentioned in maybe the last House of Chains video yesterday. It's sort of led into by the end of House of Chains when our good friend Tral Sengar, who is now our main character, sits down with Onrak and the other Talana Mass at the First Throne and talks and basically starts telling them his life's story because they've asked for it. And surprise, surprise, this volume starts with Trollsengar doing Trollsengar things in Tist Edurland or something like that. Well, I mean, obviously we have a prologue before that, but then when the main book starts, book one starts, then that's basically where we start with Trollsengar doing Trollsengar things. And so, but still, we're definitely at the beginning of a new story arc almost, I would say, after a lot of closure happening in House of Chains. And I want to take a look at how this part kind of differs from the things before and how it's set up and what the way the first chapters start, what those can tell us about what we can expect from the rest of this volume and maybe others coming later as well. Who knows? Well, obviously we start with a prologue that has some goes back in the olden times. We have the Tist Edur and the Tist Andy or some other Tist Andy. We now learn there's like a third brother in that fell trio of Tist Andy lords next to Andarist, who is dead, and Anomandarake, and that is Silcha's Ruin, who we see being backstabbed quite literally by the main dude, so to speak, of the Tist Edur, Father Shadow. Now we obviously know there's also a Father Light, there's Mother Dark, now there's Father Shadow, who seems to be the firstborn or whatever of the Tist Edur. And he betrays Silchas Ruin, who is an albino Tist Andy, because that's cool. And I'm not going to go into any Elric territory here because Stephen Erickson has said several times that he has not read the Elric books or any of the Moorcook books before writing and coming up with those characters. So we'll just take this as is. But, there's Silchas Ruin. And he gets backstabbed after helping his sort of brother Tist Edward Scabandari defeat the Chain Chabal, of whom we have also heard. And there's once again there's these small like interconnectedness, because when that part ends, we basically have what's how to say, yeah, they mentioned that like almost all Kachain Chamal are dead except the ones at Morn, and you remember Morn being like the ruins at the beginning of our of Memories of Ice, and so yeah, there's those interconnectedness there, but that's like neither here nor there. So yeah, we have that big betrayal. We see that Silch's ruin is planted in the garden of a house of the Azath. So there's another Azath house. We have now, we know now of 4 of those. We have Tremolor in the center of 7 cities. We have the Dead House in Malaz Island, and we have the Finnest House in the Rujistan. Now we know of another one on this continent. Yeah, we also hear that apparently Scabandari will be hunted by Anomander Rake and someone called Kilmandaras, whom we have not met before. We also get another glimpse of our good friend Gothos, who is one of the coolest dudes in the entire series, I feel. Like, I mean, Jaghat are cool. I like their sense of humor. And Gothos is one of the cooler ones. And we meet Mael, the elder god of the sea, whom we've heard before of when we heard that Malik Rel is the Gistal priest of Elder Mael. So he's an elder god. He's the elder god of the seas. We also here have that other like short prologue of Withal, a Mekros. We have already heard about the Mekros as a people that lives on floating cities, which is really cool, and I wish we had more Mekros stuff, but we don't. And he ending up on the island of the crippled gods. So we now know, I mean, he says that the crippled god tells that his warren or his small bit of realm is floating around. So from like, I mean, he's camping, but the good thing about his camping is that he doesn't actually have to take down his tent. He can just like take the country around his tent and go somewhere else, apparently. So yeah, we see Withal making that deal with the crippled god, or something of a deal with the crippled god, to actually forge him a sword, and we'll see what happens with that. Now, what I find now, that's too we need to talk about that later, because I don't want to go spoilery here. So that's basically the prologue. There's a lot of seeds being planted. And now I want to look at the setup in the first 2 chapters, first 2.5 chapters here. And I think something is interesting. 2 or 3 things are interesting here. Let's start with the first one. Timing. Time and a feeling of time. Now, everything here in Midnight Tides feels ancient or antique, so to say, or old. The Tist Edor, I mean, we've met them before, and by meet, I mean we've come across dead Tist Edor. They're always like described as rather primitive by other people, wearing all these fetishes and coming across as not as like slick and all of that, like the Tist Andy. So they have like a more barbaric appearance, or the corpses we've found so far, whether they are in ships. Oh right, that's true. We met some live Tist Edor, but they just didn't like remain live for a long time, because we've met them with Karsa Ordong, and he's not the kind of person who has a lot of people stay alive around him. Anyway, so we have them in this more tribal thing now showing up in their home country. And on the other hand, and this is like, I mean, obviously this takes place before the events of House of Chains, because at the beginning of House of Chains we meet Tralsengar after he is being kicked out apparently by his brothers. And this is interesting. So we basically already know how this part of Midnight Tides will, or how at least a large part of Midnight Tides will end. It will end by his brothers, and we know that he has 3 brothers at this point. Throwing him out of the family, and with this Shonin, we already know the end here. It's more one of those cases where it's like, we know the end. We're just gonna figure out how we get there. It's which I like as a setup. It's something that you sometimes see in, crime novels, detective novels. It's sort of the Columbo thing. Like if you watch those old Columbo movies, it's like, we know who did it, we know who's done it. We're just gonna figure out how we get there. Now, forget that. That's obviously not how this is set up. It's just like the idea of starting at the back. Like starting already knowing the end. So we also know that, like, time-wise, this takes place before the events of House of Chains. But yeah, I already forgot how much before, because obviously we get the timing thing at the beginning of the book. But I started studying history in recent enough years, and in a culture which is the Western European and Anglo-Saxon culture of studying history, which means I'm not used to paying any mind to dates, because dates are not what matters. So I take that one over into reading fantasy. So I already forgot the age. Right? It's obviously before the events of House of Chains, and it's somewhere within the lifetime of one Tist Edur, although obviously they, being Tist, probably grow really old. But what I mean is that feeling of antiquity is also shown in other things. For example, and one of the scenes in the first chapter, we have that feather witch throwing the tiles to predict. And now we already knew, and they're talking about holds, and we have learned since Deadhouse Gates that holds are an older version to like an older set of rules, an older structure behind the powers of the universe, before they got refined into the houses and the deck of dragons. But here on this continent, the humans, the Letheri, apparently still use and think in holds. So even though we're probably not like hundreds of thousands of years in the past, I mean, we're not. Those people are culturally, or in their like knowledge of the world scientifically, quite left behind compared to the Malazan world on this other continent, which is, as I said, this feeling of antiquity. The feeling of time is more important here than the actual time. They've been left behind in a way. And I'm going to come back to that later on, maybe, or maybe I should already talk about it now. I'll come back to it in a minute. So we have that there. We also see that apparently there's like the main two things in this continent being the conflict that we're being set up for is the conflict between the Tist Edur and the Letheri realm empire, whatever you want to call it, which is a human empire. And now this is the next bit that I want to look at, because let's leave the time thing behind for now. The next bit we're going to look at is culture. Now, obviously, there's always been, like, the cultures that we've encountered so far in the Malazan Book of the Fallen are all really, like, rather unique. There's always some kind of connection that we can make to real world cultures that we've heard about or whatever from, like, world history. But they've always had, like, their small nicks and details and stuff like that. But they were also rarely described in extreme detail unless it mattered, which is rarely so far. But this time round, a lot of the first chapters is spent with introducing us to the culture, to the cultural ways, traditions, and so forth of those two civilizations, of the Letheri and the Tist Edur, which can be read, and I'm reading it as that because obviously I know what's going to happen, but also I feel it's a natural conclusion there, and it's like what I want to talk about, how this is set up this time around. Where like in Gardens of the Moon, that first bit, we were like introduced to all kinds of like characters in detail, what they're doing and so forth. This time around, we're mostly introduced into those two cultures, which can be seen as that this second part, this second, like if you want to call it part, this second larger bit of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is more focused on cultures, and that the Tist Edur culture and the Letheri culture are sort of characters of their own within the coming conflict, because we obviously know that there's a conflict coming, and it's going to be a clash of those cultures, of the Letheri culture and the Tist Edur culture. That's basically what we know already, just by looking at how much time is spent on introducing, describing those different cultures, those giving us a feel, the descriptions giving us a feel for how these two cultures work. And things that you can take from there is that the Letheri are a rather short-lived, high-speed, high-stress culture, whereas the Tist Edur have this more traditional, almost timeless feel to it. It's like things, obviously, because Tist Edur are long-lived, move much slower than in Letheras, apparently. And we have these like, apparently there's a tribal structure within the Letheri, not Letheri, the Tist Edur culture. There is a definite feel of either, like, we don't know that much about Norse culture, but there's a lot of that. There's a kind of hint of that in there with the longhouses. There's also what I would say a First Nation, Native American, North America. I guess that's, I'm not an expert on that shit, because obviously I live in a continent and we're just as focused on our history that as our people in like the Americas. But it has this feeling of the like First Nation and like North America and Canada feel to it. This culture is like, it's hunter gatherer mostly, but unlike more southerly, like as some of the like Native Americans within, say, the like, it's not nomadic, it's hunter gatherer, but it's also village based at this point. It has grown obviously because we have a village that has like 50,000 inhabitants, so it's basically a city, but it still works like a village. A lot of it is focused on fishing and yeah, killing seals and stuff like that. That part in there, so it gives us an interest, not an interesting, but it gives us enough to put our own imagination on it, whether that is from actually living on that continent, having first-hand, second-hand experience, or like in my case, reading too many Deadlands source books, apparently, which is not a proper education, but a lot of fun to do. So we have that on the Tist Edur side. We also see that, there's we learn about rituals, about courtship rituals there, with that whole setup, with fear being the weapons master and so forth. So it goes into a lot of detail and shows that those details are very, very important for the upcoming conflict and for the overall themes of this part of the book, of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Also, like the pace the pace of the narration within the Tist Edor parts is rather slow or stately, if you want. And then we switch to the tone is also rather stately and I don't want to say severe, but serious. On the other hand, we have the parts in Letheras where we meet our the probably one of my favorite parts, one of my favorite characters, which is a couple of characters, which is Bug and Tehol, and those are a lot of fun. The overall like atmosphere I get from Letheras and from the main city of Lether is a very Discworld feel. There's serious, at least for me, there's serious parallels between Ankh-Morpork and Lether in the tone and the like, this being closer to the absurd than anything else we've met so far. Also the modernity, because while the city, like the beliefs and the religion and some of those things, the magic system, like the magic system is, oh, what a bullshit, like, well, bullshit, like, no, the magic, the thing, like all of that stuff seems rather antique in Lether. Their love for money, the high speed and high energy of their culture feels very modern in a way, which obviously brings its own things to think about. It's like you, like in your mindset, you're like way in the past, but you're living a very fast like life focused on worldly goods and so forth, which has also this weird thing that I sometimes get from Discworld, where you have this thing where Discworld, especially like Ankh-Morpork, has moved over time into like this more like image of modern times, large cities, especially London there, but obviously we're not talking Discworld here, but that feel is in there, that slight comedic edge, the like fast-paced, witty banter and conversation has a lot of Discworld feel to me, and I obviously love that because Discworld. But yeah, we already learn in the first chapters that this is a very, dare I say, capitalist society. It's focused on the gaining of wealth, and wealth, monetary wealth, is the be all end all in Letheri society, which by its nature is thus expansionist, because that's like continuous growth is not something you can, it's not something you can sustain within a limited area and with limited resources. That's just not possible. As we, as humans, are finding out, or still struggling with finding out or accepting outside of Malazan, as they say. But yeah, so we see that. So the conflict between this more subtle, more rapacious culture on the one hand, and this stately, slower, tribal civilization on the other hand, is something that will definitely dominate the upcoming parts of the book. And that's what I found, like the way this is prefigured and foreshadowed, not even foreshadowed, but just set up in a way where we have this this heavy focus on the descriptions of the culture there is done really well. We obviously also have this next bit there, which is already set up in a way that the people that are struggling with those cultures, and that's like a typical thing. We'll talk more about that in future installments, I'm very sure. Is we already have the malcontents, the people that are unhappy with how that's their individual culture works. I mean, obviously, in every culture you have people who are unhappy with it, but the people that we're talking about see like legitimate flaws within their society. Now, so far, more of those are on the Letheri side, which is obviously Tehol on the one hand, his brother Hal on the other hand. We should also look at the fact that we have this sort of setup already with a group of brothers on each side, which kind of mirror each other. Now we've spoken about that before. That there's a lot of these like mirroring elements within the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We see that here again, set up already, sort of set up already. With on the one hand we have the Sengar brothers, which are 4 at this point, and the Bedict brothers, on the other hand, which are 3. So there's some incongruity there, but we'll see. Oh yeah, right. The other thing there, like with a long-term, short-term kind of thing, will be like a big thing, which I guess is vital to see. There's like the conflict between Lether and Letheras on the one hand, the Letheri culture on the one hand, and the Tist Edur culture on the other hand, is definitely going to be one between like a long-term and a short-term perspective, right? You look at it, it's like one of them thinks in centuries or whatever, the other think in like days or weeks or years, which I'm sure you can all, as a homework, write down what you can take away from that for your own like ideas about reality. But do that if you want. I think it's pretty obvious. All right, so we see that. We already see the first beginnings of different plot lines evolving there. We see within the first 2 chapters, we're basically set up with what will happen and unfold over the next couple of chapters and books, and then we'll figure out how all of that will end up with our good friend Trull Sengar, the I don't want to say useful, loyal idiot, because that sounds so disparaging, because actually he's like the moral dude so far, at least. How that will end up with him sitting in a cave in 7 cities talking to undead dudes while watching over a rotting chair. We'll figure out that one out in the next coming videos. I'll return with a Midnight Tides video on Monday. Until then, I'll have other things for tomorrow and Sunday. I hope you enjoyed this. Once again, thanks for everyone who's watching this, commenting on it. I try to answer more of the comments. I just sometimes get burned out on looking at media and shit like that, and then I feel bad. But I'll try to, I mean, I'm reading everything, I'm just not always able to comment on it, so I'll try to do that more. Thanks for that, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Cheers.